Kyle, thanks so much for being on the podcast. We have a lot of ground to cover. Really excited. You run this small little company called Fullscript that we're going to talk about. This small little startup based in Ottawa that seems to be doing well. So we're going to talk a lot about that, but also a little bit of your career, your background, and you know these two gentlemen pretty well for a long time. Maybe I'll kick it to you, Ian, for first question.
All right, thanks, Nectar and Kyle. Thank you so much for agreeing to being with us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Um, it's been what, almost 14 years already. It's crazy. Obviously, we spent more time together back then. You've been kind of
The early
focused
days.
on building a business, right? And one of the things I definitely want to talk about today is how, contrary to so many, you really went into deep focus mode, and today you have a massive business, which we'll talk about. And it's kind of like, oh my God, how come nobody knows about this, right? It's pretty amazing what you guys have accomplished. And so maybe to kick us off, a brief background on who you are, and then maybe that can trickle into the business that you've been focused on for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, so you mentioned it, Fullscript, co-founder, CEO. We started the company back in 2012. And, it's one of those stories where we grew from two of us in our guest bedroom to now servicing over 100,000 practitioners and 10 million patients with the leading tech platform that powers whole person medicine for both practitioners and patients. So it's just been a wild journey. The plan for me was always to be a firefighter. My dad was a firefighter. So to go from like that being the plan to now being where we are, it's just been incredible. And as you described, those early days of spending time at Notman House and getting the mentorship, and that's been a big key to the journey. Just the different individuals I've met along the way who've helped us think through, how do we get to where we want to go, and we're really happy with where we're at, but there's still a lot to do.
Amazing. I never heard that side of the story, Kyle, about your dad being a firefighter. Some people joke at some of the companies that I've worked at that being in a startup and having an executive role is somewhat like being a firefighter. Of course, it's
Yeah.
no more, not even close in terms of physical danger, but just how you're kind of running around, jumping, and putting out
Totally.
fires all over the
Yeah,
place.
we actually talk, like when I think about the culture that we've modeled at Fullscript, we actually take into account, I think, what I learned watching kind of the brotherhood and sisterhood of firefighting, which is this ability to, like, as soon as there's a call, like they're all business, they're all in, they know exactly what they need to do, and there's nothing more important than getting the job done. But at the same time, when they get back to the hall, they're still having fun, they're still goofing around, there's still this camaraderie, and there's just this importance of having the two extremes, I think, in building a culture. So for me, I think building Fullscript and kind of seeing what I loved about the firefighting culture and kind of intertwining the two, it was actually a competitive advantage for us. And to your point, like you are always firefighting, especially the early days. And when I say the early days, it's like the first 7 to 10 years. That's all you're doing.
And I can only imagine like that bond, right, must be so powerful, so meaningful in the firefighter community. Like we're going in together to tackle this fire, and if you're able to replicate that in in your company, that sounds like a almost an unfair advantage, right? It's like it's
Yeah, I,
incredible.
I I think that's definitely one of our keys to success. Is I feel like we've been able to not only do that at the start, which is it's a lot easier when there's 20 of you and you're in the trenches together, and every moment is you all trying to figure out every problem, and the transparency of everyone knowing the problems you're facing. It's a lot easier, but I feel like we've done a really good job of continuing to do that at scale, where that mission driven culture of when you're trying to solve problems in whole person medicine and kind of create a world where medicine is simply whole person medicine. It's easy to get people excited about that purpose, but I think we've done a good job of getting and creating an environment where people work for each other. Like, end of the day, I think that's one of the realities. Like, you don't work for Fullscript, you don't work for Kyle. Like,
Yeah.
you work
Yeah.
for the person beside you. And in a world where things transition pretty quickly to not being in the office so often, one of the things that we started to prioritize was making sure we did spend more time together, offsites, whatever it took to create those like special moments where people get to know each other. Because what we found is, like there's a lot of data engineers, for example, who are fairly introverted. And, we're excited about the business, but when we brought them together in an offsite, it's like, I'm not working for Fullscript. I'm working for Johnny now. And every single day, as you're thinking about it, you just don't want to let John down. And I think that camaraderie is massive from a productivity perspective as well.
We often hear people say, "Oh, my company, the culture is so great. We're like a family," right? And I was talking to an investor recently, and he was like, that whole family thing is just bullshit. And I'm like, what? Right? Because I'm really, really big on culture. It's something
Yeah.
that I'm really passionate about. He says, that's bullshit. He says, my brother is an asshole.
Yeah.
And I tolerate him. I tolerate him because he's my brother.
Yeah.
But he's like, when you're building a company, you can't tolerate the weakest link. He's like, at my company, I want to be a sports team, a professional sports
That's
team,
right.
because you don't tolerate, anyone who doesn't perform. But the analogy to the firefighter community is really interesting. I'd never seen it, but it could just as well be that. Like if you're going in the fire, you're not going to let your people down, right? You're going to make
No,
sure
exactly.
you come out with the whole group.
I like the analogy as well to having these moments where you're kind of completely on and focused as a team in terms of getting shit done, and after moments where you can relax. One of the entrepreneurs I coached back in the day, we used to talk about that through the lens of sports teams. We were both big basketball fans, and one of the nice things about sports is when you're on the court or off the court. And when you're on the court, you can go full out. In business, it's difficult sometimes because you don't really know when those moments happen. Sometimes it's very clear with a board meeting, or if you're going to pitch an investor or you're trying to close a deal, it's very clear. But the day to day, it's very hard to kind of like build up that same level of intensity that you have when you're on the court or on the ice for you guys. I know you're hockey fans.
That's
So
right.
but I like that analogy for firefighters as well in terms of being on and off.
Yeah, it's funny. Like even at our scale today, you have to be so deliberate about doing that, and that's one of the things that I think like I'm probably most proud of when I look at Fullscript is we still have that startup DNA and that ability to look at a problem we're trying to solve, and instead of spending months analyzing and what do we need to do, it's like mobilize a team, put what we call co-founders in place, because like our perspective is when you see a problem, like one of the reasons Fullscript was successful is because I had a co-founder who was a front-end developer and designer, and I had a co-founder who was a back-end engineer, and together we could basically solve any problem and get something off the ground. Well, the same thing goes with like a lot of the problems that you face with as a bigger scaled company, or when you see a new opportunity to invest in something. And right now we are investing in an adjacency outside of supplements, more focused on diagnostics. And what we did was we mobilized a team together. We put co-founders in place. We put a group together, and they were in the office every day for about 12 weeks. And that's what it took. It took 12 weeks to go from nothing to a product that's now competitive in the market. And I think it's because of that ability to say, okay, we know what we're committing to. We have purpose. This is going to be impactful. And no matter what, nothing's going to get in our way. And then to your point, everyone, steps back and takes a breath and looks at what we have, and we can go through that iterative process of like, how do you get it to the place where it's the best. But I think as you guys described, that focus and that ability to just say I'm all in, that's probably where I'm like, I'm not surprised, but I'm very proud that Fullscript still has that in our DNA.
Yeah,
I
Yeah, I
would
love
love
find
to
your
come
ship.
back to
Oh, good.
I'd love to come back to like this concept of bringing people back to the office. But before we get too far, we know the Fullscript story, and we know why we were excited to have you here. But why don't you take a couple minutes to give everyone a sense of like, we know what you do, but like how successful are you? Like talk about the progress you made in those 12 years, and give I guess a sense of credibility to why we have you as a guest.
Right. Yeah. So,
Also,
sorry.
maybe just to tack onto that, it'd be great. I think, as Ian said, we have the background story, but it'd be also great to hear the background story of Fullscript. And I
Yeah.
know you built the business in maybe a atypical way for a company, a tech company of your size. So maybe you can
Yeah.
touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so I can, I think ultimately the long story, and it'll probably be the long story long, but when I was in school, as I said, I wanted to be a firefighter. I ended up starting a not-for-profit, doing a cycle across Canada, and building this not-for-profit like a business. And that was the kind of aha moment that I like creating and building something. Woke up every single day just super passionate about what we were doing. So right out of school, I ended up building an animated video company called Simple Story Videos. It's now called Simple Stories. Um, had the same sort of passion when it came to building, putting the team together. We actually scaled that to a 7-figure business in like a 6-month period. But there was something missing, and it was that purpose and that impact. Like what we wanted to do was make impact, and hard to scale a service-based business. Also, doing corporate videos for businesses just wasn't that exciting. So we ended up selling that, and my co-founder and I, who'd done that together, and he'd helped me with the not-for-profit, we kind of looked at each other and said, whatever we do next has to be something you can do for the rest of your lives, something that has impact. And I think impact for us was helping people. And I think like our mission at Fullscript is helping people get better, but it was also, doing something that could scale and have impact, across the world and touch, everyone that needs access to care, which is ultimately the place we went. And so ultimately, we started just by solving his wife's problem. My co-founder Brad, his wife was a naturopathic doctor. We started looking at some of the challenges they face, and during that time, it was kind of this recognition that this isn't a naturopathic doctor problem. The whole kind of industry and all the trends around whole person medicine just made so much sense to me and to Brad. It's like, okay, healthcare back in 2011 when we were looking at this was you've got a symptom, here's a pharmaceutical. And we were watching all these practitioners from naturopathic doctors to functional medical doctors to nutritionists who were saying, hey, you've got a symptom. What's the root cause of that symptom? And based on that root cause, maybe we can actually solve some of those problems with diet changes and, better lifestyle and exercise. And maybe it's a pharmaceutical, but guess what? Those pharmaceuticals create nutrient depletion. So instead of having all these symptoms, make sure you take these supplements so that you can actually combat that. So when we looked at that, it just made so much logical sense. We're like, this is where the world has to go. It's got to go to be, what's best for the consumer. But then what's the challenges, in this market? Well, the fact is this market is unsophisticated. There's no infrastructure to support it. There's nothing that makes it easy for a doctor to do it. And there's nothing that makes it easy for a patient to follow. So when you think about, whole person medicine, a doctor's going to spend, 45 minutes, an hour with a patient. Then they're going to spend 30 minutes actually trying to figure out what to recommend, what products to recommend, what protocol to recommend. Then they're going to deliver that via email or, PDF or a pad of paper. Then the patient receives that. They got to go figure out, where am I going to go get these products? How am I going to follow this protocol? They've lost touch with the patient or the practitioner. So we just saw so much opportunity there to basically build that infrastructure and be that whole person platform. And when we started looking at solving that problem, we said, okay, we got two options. One, we can take one component of this problem and do it really, really well and focus on market leadership first, or we can try to go broad and own the entire problem right off the bat. So we decided that in order for us to be successful, we would focus on one small component of what they were faced with as from a challenge perspective. So that was the idea of figuring out what supplements to prescribe, getting those in the hands of the patient, making it easy for the patient to fill that protocol, and get those products drop shipped right to their door, and then manage adherence around that protocol. So keep patients engaged with their plan. That was the one problem we were going to go out and solve and do it really, really well until we basically earned the right to enter adjacencies and build the rest of the platform. And so it took us, 10 years and a journey of, building a company that was basically the user experience solely, a couple large scale acquisitions, and got to a point where we felt like we now have that market leadership. As I mentioned, we're servicing now over 100,000 practitioners, 10 million patients. We're approaching $1 billion in net revenue. with 800 teammates kind of powering the work we're doing.
Yeah,
Can you
it's an
talk
amazing
a
story.
little?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
sorry, Gabriel. I was going to say just it's an amazing story. I find also below the radar, so I'm very happy that you're taking the time, Kyle, to talk about it. The one thing I find that's missing a little bit in the Canadian tech landscape is just role models. We have a few good ones. I would say Ian and Gabriel are good ones to follow. We always talk about Shopify and like they're of course such an amazing story, but it's like where are the other ones? So hats off for what you built.
No, thank you. And actually, being in Ottawa, we watching Shopify and being friends with the guys building Shopify was actually a huge
Right.
inspiration, right? It's like whenever you're feeling like things aren't going right, like, am I going to be able to accomplish this? You could always kind of look to those guys and say, you know what? If they can do it, so can I. Like it just gives you that little bit of motivation and inspiration that this stuff is possible. You just got to keep your head down and keep plugging away.
Yeah. Can you
Can you
talk a
talk a
little
bit
bit
about
about? Sorry.
literally the same
I wonder if
words?
you guys are going to say the
We haven't
exact same
recorded
question.
in a
Yeah.
couple of weeks. It seems like we're all super
Yeah,
excited.
exactly. Go for it, Gabriel. Go for it.
Yeah, maybe we're going to ask the same thing. So maybe you can talk a little bit. I was doing a little bit of homework, and I saw a line in an article talk about raising this massive round. I think it referenced that it was the largest round in Ottawa since the first .com bubble. I think 248 million, I believe.
Yeah.
You didn't raise, I mean, that's a massive amount of capital, but that was later on in the journey. You didn't raise much money at the beginning. Can you talk a little
No.
bit about that and kind of bootstrapping, what the conversations were like with investors? People, it seems to be like in vogue now for investors to say, oh, I want to invest in industries where there's no TAM, because that's where
Yeah.
like the outlier opportunities are. But I'm guessing you heard that kind of conversation when you were talking to people about this opportunity.
Yeah, I think when comes to raising money, this is actually one thing that I really do want to demystify for founders. Is when I first started the company, I'm learning via watching like This Week in Startups or listening to podcasts like this, and then you start to feel like the only way to build something great is to be VC backed and tell this great tech story and everything like that. And then as I started getting involved and meeting with VCs, and I just didn't feel like there was a real fit. And to your point, Gabe, it was very much along the lines of we saw the trends and the tailwinds behind whole person medicine. We knew we were only solving one small component of it, but it always came down to this isn't going to be big enough, and we were actually in revenue right from the start. Like we actually went out and acquired like half the naturopathic doctors in Canada, with basically bootstrapped. And still, it was funny because as I would talk about real traction with a VC, they'd be like, oh, there's nothing here. And then there'd be someone who's just pitching on a pitch deck who'd get funded $1 million because they're better storytellers than I was. And so for me, it just started to get really demoralizing. And at the same time, again, having 3 co-founders who could basically do everything and get it to a place where you're in revenue, you're in a fairly unsophisticated, like this niche, unsophisticated market. When I say unsophisticated, just there wasn't any technology companies investing. There was no kind of cutting edge. How do we take this to the next level? That was all happening in traditional medicine. So for me, I felt like, hey, we can build this in an extremely capital efficient way. We're in revenue today. We can actually get to profitability fairly quick and continue to grow. And so, as we were going through, I was just getting so demoralized. I realized like, instead of spending all this time trying to convince another person what I see, let's just go build it, get it to a place where we're self-sustainable, and then we kind of own our own destiny. And we did raise a little bit of angel money along the way, which we'd never have been here if some of the Ottawa-based angels and some friends and family didn't step up to help us get over the edge. And then we ended up getting to profitability through a large acquisition where I can kind of step back and say like our path into this was we were going to be the user experience part of the business model. So it was, hey, we're going to be the software. We're going to offer all the customer support. We're going to make it really easy for a doctor to dispense supplements to their patients. Ultimately, I don't want to go back into to describe what we do. But what that meant was when a patient actually fills their protocol that was delivered by a doctor, products need to be drop shipped. And what we did is we ended up partnering with the largest, professional grade healthcare practitioner distribution companies in the US. And what we realized in 2018 was that there was a reason that we needed to own that end to end and remove ourselves from just being this technology user experience company and having a little bit more infrastructure. And it was because, one, margin, to get to a place where we were really going to be profitable, we did need to own kind of the supply chain side of it. And then two, it was user experience. And that was probably the most important, which is, you can build this perfect, beautiful user experience. You can invest a lot in making sure your customers are serviced. But if you don't have kind of the full control, you lose a big opportunity. And our model is pretty simple. It's B2B2C. So it's great. Like once you get one doctor, you get all of their patients, and then you get the patient staying on. So it compounds on top of itself. But if you have one bad experience with one patient, that can actually cause a doctor to leave the platform. So it's really critical for us to own that. And that's when we really got to a place of profitability. We ended up raising a Series B, $25 million round. I think that ended up putting like $15 million on our balance sheet, and it never left our balance sheet. It was just kind of there as, make sure we could, felt comfortable more than anything. So we really didn't ever need to raise funds. Even when we did the round you just disclosed, that was never really needed from a growth capital perspective. We have such a really strong machine here that allows us to continue to scale and have the confidence that we can do opportunistic things as they come.
It's really interesting to hear you talk. There's a few things that are resonating that we've had the discussion in the past, but like this concept, and I think you're ahead of your time, right? Like 10 years ago, understanding that you didn't have to raise venture capital. I mean, 10 years ago, even today, right? Everyone's like, oh, I got to raise money.
Listen, I
Dude,
like country. I like country music before it was cool, and I like profitability before it was cool. That's like two of my claim to fame.
And you're way ahead of the curve on the hockey scene, but we can talk about that later. And then the second thing is, I like to call it building tech for purpose, not building tech for tech. Like so many people build
Right.
tech just because, right? But the third thing that I think is really even more important, and this is actually a word I learned about recently. This concept of profitability. I didn't know this thing existed, but the fact that you've been focused on it for so long, and that today in 2024, I mean, Nectar. I mean, you're probably seeing this, but like, all VCs are like, or angels are like, we got to focus on profitability. It's no longer just about the top line. So it's great to hear you talk about that, but and the story behind it, what
Yeah.
drove that.
Yeah, and the thing that founders have to realize too, like if you can have strong growth rates combined with profitability, you then have optionality, right? So you can go VC, you can go angel, you can bootstrap, you can go private equity, right? Like a lot of founders have no idea even what private equity is or kind of growth private equity is, but it's such an amazing opportunity for founders. You build a strong enough business, you can sell your business to private equity, you can re-up and continue to sell your business over and over again if you're a strong operator. So there's just all these different kind of paths to exit and liquidity that founders just don't know about, that there should be a path to educating them a little bit more.
Yeah, I was listening to Ken Harris from Plusgrade that I think follows a similar trajectory to yours, where I think he's on his like third, private equity sponsor. And I think you're on kind of the same trajectory, right? Like you can sell your business multiple times and obviously maintain the mission, right? You don't have to like
Yep.
sell and earn out and the more classic exit route, but keep building, right? Which I find is really
Yep.
cool. I want to maybe ask a personal question because I think you shared so many good tidbits of wisdom of like, like building culture, focus. But, like you said, starting from the basement to today to being 100 people, imagine you've had to grow a lot and your day-to-day responsibility is not, like selling and being in the trenches anymore, right? So what are the ways that you've grown or maybe some principles that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I think you've probably heard this. This a lot of founders or companies say this, but like this idea that you have to grow faster than the company, and it is true, right? Like when I started, I thought I was going to be maybe 100-person CEO. Like that was maybe going to be my sweet spot as far as it could go. And along the way, I've just enjoyed kind of evolving from a CEO to, or a founder, an entrepreneur to, an entrepreneurial CEO or an entrepreneurial operator. And to get there, it's been, you have to be really deliberate. You have to be really self-aware of kind of where you're at, what your weaknesses are, and how to shore them up. So there's things like being really uh, open-minded about what you need around you from a team perspective. Like if you're going to grow and accelerate and actually be a CEO that operates a business of scale, you better be ready to bring the right people in at the right times to support your weaknesses and solve the problems that you're just not good at solving, that you don't like solving, and that you're not kind of qualified to solve. I spent a lot of time early starting to do executive coaching. Started off probably more on the psychological side, where you have that like fiery entrepreneurial mindset where you want to challenge everyone, and then you realize that you keep running into walls in a bigger organization, and you have to kind of evolve and adapt, where you can still get what you want, but you can do it in a I guess more calm and cool and collected way that gets the real buy-in that you need. So it's coaching. That coaching has actually evolved to maybe more tactical coaching now, or the psychology started to resonate. You kind of get to a place where, just like, you basically get to a place where I don't think you grow out of your coach, but yeah, maybe, I think I did. I've grown out of my coaches a couple times where, it's a psychological coach. Okay, I feel like I got that. Then it's the tactical coach who's, 2 years ahead of you, really helping you solve some problems. And then it's like, okay, I want a coach now who's already been there, done that, who's going to really help me be a little bit more ambitious. It's like Portco tours, like talking to your, for us, like HEC, Snapdragon, our sponsors, like getting introductions to all of their CEOs, building relationships with them, understanding how to do, how do you work in a world like, with growth equity and private equity, because it's different than, what I have ever experienced. I think it's like being very deliberate about building a great board. Like when I look at how I grow, I've put together a board that I think is, I call them my CEO expansion pack, because they're very diverse with respect to what they bring to the table, their experiences, extremely open-minded, and basically mentors, right? They're there to help me kind of to get better. So I think overall it's been, those things. And then I think it's the mindset of any entrepreneur, which I think helps anyone grow. It's if you're staying connected to the frontline teammates, to your customers, to your partners, like you're just hearing things and listening and learning along the way that you can't help but grow.
On the topic of board, I find that comment very interesting because, oftentimes putting a board in place will be driven by, raising around, right? The VC's like, I want a board seat. And prior to that, it's basically non-existent. Can you talk about, in your case, when did you set that up? Or in the case of someone who's bootstrapping, who hasn't raised, like when should they consider that and how to go about it? Because oftentimes it's driven by investors.
Yeah, it all, when I look at like when our board became really productive, it was actually when we did the deal with HEC and Snapdragon, and we were putting 5 private equity finance guys on the board. And one of the things I said to them, like, I don't want to just basically report up to 5 people who've never operated before. I don't think it'll be value add to me. I don't think it'll be very effective for the company. So why don't we put together a group of individuals that are operators, so we can have a little bit more balance on this board, and we can actually help us get to the place we want to get to. So we ended up putting one of the strongest business leaders I know on the board, former CFO, CEO, has done everything. We put a CEO from another company that I'd kind of been doing some coaching, or they've been coaching me. We put together a chief marketing officer to help with the commercial side. We put on a VP of data science who ran Shopify's data team. I think they ran 500 people. So we got this real diverse group. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, now we have a group that actually helps build the business and helps grow. And I think it comes down to, if you put a board in place, if you don't actually be very deliberate about how you work with that board, it's going to be a shit show. Right. So if you're just walking into every board meeting and expecting them to like be supportive and be helpful, it's not going to happen. You have to be super deliberate with how you use your board in order to drive success with it. And I can go into that if you want, but there's a few things that I do to kind of make sure that our board is effective.
How hard was it to sell that concept to the people at the PE firms?
You know what? Going through a process of bringing private equity in it's just that it's a process, and you meet a lot of different groups along the way. And the group that we chose, they actually they kind of branded themselves as the nice guys of private equity. And you get worried in a process because you never know if that's truly what it's going to be like when they get in into the team. But quite frankly, like, they weren't even our highest bid when we were going through the process from a valuation perspective. But for me, they were going to be my partners, and I wanted to make sure I chose individuals that were actually like underwriting the executive team.
Mm-hmm.
They were underwriting the strategy. They weren't looking at this and saying, okay, well, how do I strip it down and do it my way? It was very much like, this is a growth company, and we're just here to help facilitate the outcome that we all want us to get to. So they have been, I feel like we're very lucky. They've been extremely supportive. They've been a group that says, okay, if that's what you want and you think it's going to be helpful, like, we're in. And it takes time, right? It also takes, day one, are they going to be like bought in completely? Maybe not. But as you build trust with that group and they see how you operate, it becomes much easier to kind of get what you want because they know it's for the greater good of the business.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Maybe I'll switch gears a little bit and touch on something you mentioned before. You were mentioning building the company in Ottawa. You had role models in Toby, and I think I saw online that you're buddies with Harley as well. I don't know if you saw some of the coverage that came out. BetaKit had this big town hall in Toronto where Toby came in, and they were talking about the state of tech in Canada. I'm curious for your perspective in terms of, what you feel needs to happen. I think you're one of the entrepreneurs who have been very successful building in Canada, building from Ottawa, not raising a lot of VC, not being, tempted or forced to move to the Valley to raise that capital. Anything you can share in terms of what are some of the ingredients or some of the blockers holding Canada back?
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a holding Canada back, and I don't know how qualified I am to like see everything going on across like the Canadian US ecosystem, and it's because I'm just so probably micro focused on Fullscript. But I think maybe that's part of the ingredient that every entrepreneur should think about. The entrepreneurs that I always struggled to connect with and empathize with were the ones that would rather have their face, on BetaKit's front page than actually build something great. And I find, like, at the end of the day, if you're out there hyping something that's not real and you're not authentic, like, that's just a recipe for, implosion. Versus, like, if you want to build something great, look at all the things that are required to build something great. Okay, it's what are the teammates I need to get this thing off the ground? Who are the people who've been there, done that, who I'm going to go learn from and listen to? But it comes down to, from my perspective, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, but just like put your head down and do the work. And if that's what you're motivated by, if you're motivated by building and creating, and you're not motivated by, your face on the front page, I think that's, sometimes entrepreneurs need to check their ego a little bit and focus on what really matters, which is the customer, which is building, which is figuring things out. And look, if you are successful, sometimes you can't help but that's like the byproduct of it. It's actually something I feel uncomfortable. I hate, that's like the byproduct I hate about where we're at right now, is that I'm being forced to do podcasts now and get my name out there, and people are going to hear about it. But
Ian, you flexed them? You didn't tell us this.
Yeah.
We arm wrestled for it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's great.
because it's cool. It's cool. Like, entrepreneurship's cool, right?
Yeah.
Like, Not My House is cool.
Yeah.
Like, there's all these things that people, like, they get enamored by the coolness of it all versus like the reality of what it actually takes. And it takes a lot to kind of create something that's real.
I was listening
to romanticize quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
I was listening to the podcast you did with our friend Mark McLeod prior to having you on, and you guys were talking about hockey. I'm sure Ian's Jones in to talk about the hockey side of things, but it sounds like you were the type of player that was just not talking trash, but just showing it by doing it. Like,
Right.
hey, I don't need to talk a big game. I'm just gonna show you.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I was never the skilled one, and I would say I'm probably still not. Like the way that I'm like in playing hockey, it was always the grinder, the one that would work harder than anyone else, that would always listen to the coach, instructions and make sure I accomplished what we were setting out to do. And to your point, it was leading by like just doing. And I think we do that today. Like even I was mentioning that the project that we had, the diagnostic project where we had people coming in every single day to work. Like I'm not there. There's not a lot of value I can offer. But every day that I'm in town and I'm not traveling for work, I'm at the office with them. I'm getting them their coffee. I'm doing whatever I can to be there and be someone that shows that I'm a teammate and I'm a partner. And I'm not a CEO that runs this company from my ivory tower from a spreadsheet. Like I'm going to be there with you, grinding it out and empathizing with everything you're doing and sacrificing to build what you're building, because we wouldn't be here without you. So
Can we take a minute to talk about that? Like, a lot of the big tech companies have now implemented return to office
yeah,
policies, right? Like going back to my earlier comment about being obsessed with creating culture, I find it very difficult to create culture without presence in the office. And similar to you, I'm always in the office if I'm not traveling. Um, and I think it's coming. I think more and more are going to do it. Like Google's done it, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Like a lot of it have done it. Like, what do you think the future is? Like, are we going to be in remote? We're going to go back to office? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah. Our motto. It's funny. Like it's always been kind of a work where you work well. But if I look at like some of the secret sauce for Fullscript, it was. So we had 7 floors in our office, our old office, right on Elgin Street of Ottawa. If anyone knows Ottawa, Elgin Street's kind of like a main downtown area. And we had 7 floors, and there was a bar across the street called Whalesbone, and we called that the eighth floor because, like, it's just 3 o'clock would come along. You've had a long day, and you go, okay, hey Johnny, let's go grab a drink, and would love to just catch up. Well, you sit there with a pen and paper, and you have a drink or coffee or whatever fancy, whatever you fancy, and ultimately it turns into a complaining fest where all of a sudden you start hearing Johnny complain about everything, and you kind of like open him up to be able to tell you everything going on, and you sit there and solve these things that you literally would never solve if you had these structured connections. Like every structured connection, you're there, yeah, you solve this one problem that we know we need to solve. But I found that going to the eighth floor and spending time, breaking bread with your teammates and actually hearing the real problems was like the magic that allowed us to really see and fix and build trust too with our teammates. And so like those are the moments that I miss. Like I don't, if I need to sit on my computer and do like work, I don't actually need to be in the office. It doesn't help me.
Yeah.
But if it's like those unstructured moments to me, I'm like, how do you recreate those and get enough of those to keep the culture moving, to identify the problems that you just don't hear about enough? So that's what we're trying to solve. The project that I'm describing, which I know like my chief of staff told me not to talk about diagnostics, but it's basically out there anyway, so I'm doing it. We that was actually a deliberate move by the individuals leading that project. They said, you know what, like we've spoken about doing this a number of times. We've kind of had a couple of false starts. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. We're going to put the best team in place. We're going to make sure we're going to mandate being in the office if you want to be a part of this team. We're going to make sure that everyone gets their parking paid for, lunch, dinner. Like they created a whole different way of building product at Fullscript because they knew that's what it would take to do it in the timeline they had. So we don't actually mandate anyone. We mandated anyone that wanted to be a part of that team, that's what we were going to be doing for a 3-month period.
Yeah, it's a great
And
approach.
then, yeah, and for now we're trying to figure out, hey, how do you just create incentives, for people to want to be there? When we were doing that, the office was packed because people started to feel the energy.
Yeah.
And I think the other problem, and I don't mean to keep rambling here, but one of the things that I think about often is a lot of people want it and they get excited by it. Then they get to the office and there's 3 people there. And they're like, why did I spend
Yeah.
all this time coming here? So there's like this chicken and egg thing you got to try and figure out, which is like
Mhm.
when people start to feel it and there's 70, 80, 100 people in the office, there's just this energy
Yeah.
that is contagious and they want more of it.
They like it. Yeah,
they
they
like
want
it.
more of it, right? When they taste it, they like more of it. And it's funny,
Yeah.
this thing about the eighth floor. Today I was in the office and I had coffee with someone. We had to have we had a topic, but we ended up like, I found out a lot of things that this person was worried about, which I addressed. Had I been on Zoom, I probably never would have heard of it, right? We
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
I
really
Yeah.
love
There's
cool.
just
also
there's
that
a
you're listening to the team, right? It sounds like people
right.
were concerned about, okay, I have to pay for parking, or if I work from home, I
Right.
save money on lunch. And so you're like systematically breaking down all of these barriers to bring people back to the office. And you're
Yeah.
giving them the choice, right? Like if you want to be on this team and you want to work on the exciting new thing, that's just part of the deal. It's okay if you don't want to, but if you want to be on this team, you got to be in the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
Mm.
100%. I
Yeah.
think that's like a key, ingredient for just building a great culture in general is the ability to want and the want to like understand what's going on at each level of the business and caring enough to like listen. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the things that, at Fullscript, there's no egos, there's no empire building. Literally, like a customer support rep is their idea is just as valuable as my chief commercial officer. No one cares where it comes from. And I think like creating an environment where you do truly listen and you may not agree but you've listened and you give a reason that you've made a decision because like parents, it's like, hey, because I told you so. Like, as soon as you start creating an environment like that, you actually like you just turn everyone off versus, hey, I
Yeah.
heard these 5 things, great points, but here's what we're doing and why. You can get complete buy-in. So it's really key, regardless of like the small little initiative that we're doing, like diagnostics, and how we're operationally setting it up to just how you run the business. I think it's
It's
critical to
it's
never
great
lose
that
that.
you've been able to do it at scale, right? It's
Right.
easier, like you said, when you're a smaller company, but as you get bigger, you have to be very deliberate. And it sounds like you've been very deliberate about
Yeah.
instituting these
Are you
types
hiring?
We are. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds so corny. Like people talk about core values and guiding principles and everything like that. But that is one thing that, when I looked at some of the challenges of as you start to lose that DNA as you start to scale, that was one of the things that we made sure we implemented, which was, okay, what are those core
Yeah.
values that we've
Yeah.
always had? Let's make sure we,
Mhm.
galvanize and crystallize those. But then what are the guiding principles that got us to where we are, such as growing faster than the company or putting a premium on speed or like independent thinking? And then actually like making sure that it's not just me delivering that, right? Because, I would say a lot of the DNA of those guiding principles is exactly how our founders and our early employees operated. But now it's
Yeah.
every leader at Fullscript is, responsible for cascading that and living it. And it's the only way that you can make it happen. But
I think
there's so many companies that have core values and guiding principles, and they're just like words on a board that no one
Yeah.
actually listens
We,
to or
we've talked
follows.
we've talked about that one too. I'm a huge, huge, huge proponent of that. Like, I think it's
yeah,
so important, but again, words on a wall are nothing. It's like,
yeah.
how do you actually instill it in
Right.
everything that you do,
Mhm.
everything daily,
Mhm.
right? But I think it's a
Yeah,
huge driver of culture.
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe I'll two quick points. One esoteric, Kyle. Like I think you're sharing a lot. Like you've crammed so much wisdom in these 45 minutes, and it really shows of just you mentioned the word focus, right? So you've been heads down building. The customer is the one that's really going to dictate, how your company is going to go. So you've been focused on that. And at your point about the Canadian ecosystem or not looking, where you're like, well, at the same time, you're sharing all these lessons. I think so many founders would benefit from like these all these little short tidbits you've been sharing, but like have been, it sounds like hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of learning compressed into one soundbite. That's like
Right.
really shows that you've been really intentional thinking about running your company that I think everyone should consider, right? Very good rules, right? Especially in today's age where like you're obviously a new school of leaders, new generation that you have to have more empathy. You have to think about the other. It's not this is the way it's done and this is how you build. So, and it's going to be a very sharp left turn where I'm going here, but it's like at the same time, I find it very disappointing when you look at some of the efforts from the government in terms of like, like capital gains tax and all these things that hand, like handicap founders that are trying to do what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit earlier in their journey. Um, I think Gabriel mentioned before the town hall, which is kind of the trying to come back to it. Any thoughts on that? Like, I know you said you're focused on Fullscript, as you
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah, if you talk about the capital gains and what it means for entrepreneurs, it crushes me a bit because it's so easy to sit here and talk about the success we've had and talk about building something of real value that we all have ownership in. But you forget, like, what about the first 8 years? Where literally, as an entrepreneur, I was either making no money or $50,000 a year, when I couldn't pay mortgage payments, when I couldn't pay my visas, when I had to go and like make the hardest decisions in my life and fire half our team because we couldn't afford to pay them, to the employees who took pay cuts and knowing that they were going to hopefully build something great. So for 7-8 years we're sacrificing everything, and then you finally do create an outcome that is all the hard work kind of coming into fruition, and hey, let's go after the people that risked it all. And
Yeah.
and the people that I think are going to drive real value in the business and drive revenue for the government and everything else. So for me, it's just a really hard thing to swallow, because I think there's a lot of variables and there's so much that isn't being taken into consideration when it comes to making decisions like that. And then what does it do? I don't know if it'll change any entrepreneur's vision, just because if you're really motivated by building, you're going to build, and it's never really about the financial outcome. The financial outcome for me is like a byproduct. It's like, just build something great and that'll come. But it's definitely going to maybe have people thinking twice. Like, do I build in Canada? If I care about building, why not build in Austin, Texas? And so it's probably a step backwards in a lot of ways.
In my circles, I've had conversations with several people who are thinking about moving because they don't necessarily have roots down in the country and have the option to.
Yeah.
I think you're right. A lot of entrepreneurs that do have a base here and have family here, it's a difficult decision to pick up and move everybody.
Right.
So it's probably not worth all of that friction, because I think, like you said as well, most entrepreneurs that I know and maybe that I'm hanging out with consciously aren't necessarily building for the financial outcome.
Yeah.
I think it's something that, of course, is great, but it's more about solving a problem. It's more about building something of value. It's more about the impact. It's all of these things. But it does, like you said, it's kind of like a bucket of cold water poured over people.
Yeah.
It's hard to take it, where people put in all of these sacrifices, and then at the end of all of it, if you are successful, people come and they're taking a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
And again, I'll reference Mark's podcast. I know on that episode you were talking about a lot of the personal sacrifices that you were making at the beginning with your family, choosing when to have a family. I think it's one of these things that I think people can't fully understand until they're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can express to somebody. It's like almost like having a kid. Nobody will really fully understand what it means to have a kid until they have their own. I think it's the same.
It's like having a dog, right? The same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, there's no way for people to fully get it. So I think that's why maybe it's hard for people to grasp that
it's hard for them to empathize, because they see the outcome, they don't see the journey. And instead of like being critical thinkers and independent thinkers, they're going right to that, versus like, let me think about what it took Kyle and his team and all these individuals that got us to where we are. Like, let's really think about what that was like. And most people that I know would not have sacrificed what, like myself and a lot of the people around me sacrificed, who I owe like a great deal of, this wouldn't have been successful if there wasn't like this core group of individuals who sacrificed a lot to get to where we are. People just they don't even want to think about that. They would want to think about, oh, look, there's the Fullscript team. Look at the success they've had.
Yeah.
Look, Kyle, the Ottawa Senators thing, all that stuff just kind of pops up, but it's like, it took a long time to get here and a lot of hard work.
What's this Ottawa Senators thing? I wasn't going to bring it up. Well, what are you talking about?
I was just waiting for it, so I figured I'd just give you kind of a gem. I used to be a Habs fan. That's what like Ian and I actually, that was one of our like, the things that connected us. And then
Yeah.
I did what no one saw possible. Actually, I don't know if I might have said this in Mark's podcast as well, but there's an analyst who spoke about, it's funny. You can, be with your partner and you can have a rough patch, and you say, what, we're going our separate ways. But you can have a sports team that for 20 years has done nothing and continuously disappointed you, and you'll just say, what, this is our year, and you'll still have that like confidence and that connection to it, and like you just can't switch sports teams.
It's the ultimate fan base, right? Ultimate customer.
I know, but I actually got an opportunity this summer to invest alongside Michael Andlauer and the ownership group with the Ottawa Senators, and so that's the only way that I would have changed from Habs to the Senators was this opportunity, kind of this lifelong dream. I was never good enough to be part of the NHL, like to be in the NHL, so this was my path to getting there. So it's been a wicked year. We closed the deal in September and having a lot of fun.
Yeah, okay, so I guess we have to talk. Yeah.
First off, congrats on that.
Thank you.
I mean, I can't imagine having that opportunity. And I will say, if ever, I'm in that type of position and I choose to invest even in the Bruins, whatever, I would become a fan of the team I've invested in. But congrats, man. That's a hell of a
even though you would invest in the Bruins, like that's like the one team a Habs fan can't invest in. I think that's like there's an unwritten rule.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a hockey guy, but I even know that.
Yeah.
I guess, Kyle, since you're new to the ownership, and I guess we could talk about the current playoffs. But I think for first big question is gonna be like, okay, what big moves? Are you guys gonna do any big trades? Like, are you putting your thumb on the scale? Are you like going down to the GM's office, like, we need to trade for, like, I don't know, like a big player?
Yeah,
I knew Nectar always wanted this to be a sports podcast. You can already feel the energy shifting.
The one thing I'll say, and I'll connect it back to why I was excited to partner and be a follow Michael Andlauer into this ownership, and it came down to culture. Like this is a guy who's not an executive. He's not a this big billionaire businessman. He is an entrepreneur, and he's a person who cares about every employee that works at the arena. He cares about hockey. He cares about building culture. He really, really cares, and he's not here to just like overnight success. Like he wants to build sustainability into the organization. And so it's really cool watching. And he, like as an entrepreneur, it's hard to follow. He was someone that I felt really confident following and wanting to learn from. And as I watch him kind of build the organization from the people he's putting in place on the kind of the hockey ops side, how they're thinking about building the team, and what kind of the missing pieces are, it's really cool to watch. And what I love about it is there's a few of us in the group, but the transparency and the ability to really see all the inner workings of what's going on and how they're thinking about building the team and what the future looks like. It's been such an incredible experience. And again, it just shows you when you have a good kind of leader in place who actually prioritizes culture and prioritizes, long-term thinking. I think you're going to see an Ottawa Senators team that is going to be, good in the coming years, 4 years to come. So it's not going to be an overnight success, but I think you're going to see some pretty big moves. And I think you're going to see a team that's, hard to play against, is the way I would describe it.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Sorry, I apologize.
The Habs have been terrible for a long time.
Yeah. I apologize to our listeners. I'm going to bounce this around a little bit. As Nectar said, you've been dropping a lot of wisdom. I actually have a question that's a personal question that I'd love to get your perspective on.
Okay.
You're talking about building team culture. You're talking about leadership. On this other podcast, which I won't mention again, Mark's going to have to mention our podcast at least.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that you were an introvert. And so I'm curious, as an introvert or someone that identifies as an introvert, how was that journey in terms of, taking on that leadership role without being an extrovert? Like how did you, coaches will often talk about these like all hand events or opportunities to like really have a lot of impact and hit a lot of people. Any tips around how you can do that?
So I probably have to clarify too a little bit. Like my teammates and my friends are going to be like, Bratzy's not an introvert. Like but I think it's called like, for me, it's comfortability. So like, when I know people and so I'll give you an example. Like if I walked into a Notman House and there's a Founder Fuel event and no one knows who I am and I don't know who anyone else is, I struggle a lot in those environments. I don't feel comfortable. I'm like, why am I here? I don't want to do this. I struggle a lot like doing, podcasts like this where I start getting self-conscious. Am I going to say something stupid? Am I going to sound like an idiot? And, like, it's just like this, I don't know if you, what do you call it? When you don't feel imposter syndrome. That's the word I was looking for.
Right.
See, this is a perfect example of what I was scared of, me kind of stumbling my words and then I got it. So, but I think it's like these moments in life where like, I don't know anyone. I'm a little bit scared of what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do versus like, if I have a team of individuals that I've been working with for a long time, I'm going to be the most extroverted individual like in the group, so it's really kind of situational. I would say.
Okay.
And, one of the things that I would, the only way that I got through it was probably like, it's finding one person that I can start to just build a relationship or like, honestly, like having someone with me just when I'm, at an event. It's just, there's just these like things that help me get comfortable and feel a little bit, I don't know, like less self-conscious.
In your place, not an imposter.
Yeah, exactly.
You've demonstrated through action that you are where you should be. So
I need an entourage. Exactly. Maybe if I had an entourage, I'd feel.
Well, I think one thing's for sure, Kyle. You've gained a new fan in me today. That's for sure. So I say, keep doing a good job, man, and like keep being a role model. I think maybe a good place to start wrapping up. So yeah, any final questions for Kyle, guys? Otherwise, we have one maybe update for the local community to talk about Startup Open House. So maybe Gabriel, you want to take that one to give a quick shout out to Startup Open House that's happening.
We have Startup Open House happening next Thursday, May 23rd, from 1 to 6. So Startup Open House is a event that actually LP Maurice, the founder of BusBud, came up with, and the idea is kind of in the name. A bunch of startups open up their offices and allow people who are not in the startup scene or in the startup scene and want to meet more companies and more teams and more founders the opportunity to just kind of roam around the city. This year we have, I believe, 60 companies and organizations that are opening up their space or are hanging out in a shared space like Notman or Centec or some other locations. And so it's a great opportunity to just get a chance to meet people from other organizations. We've been talking about culture a lot because we got two big culture folks on the call, but it's, talking to team members is a great way to get a sense of a company's culture so that you can learn more about the organization. And maybe if you're looking for a new thing, find a path in. So if you're looking for more information, check out startupopenhouse.org. You can find out everything there.
Kyle, awesome. Thanks so much for your time, man. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're ready to come to the Ottawa Senators suite to watch a game. So whenever you want to invite us,
let's do it. Those Habs tickets are a little bit too in demand. I'll bring you in for a Bruins game.
Right.
That awesome, might lead to an indecent moment for Ian having to invest in the Bruins.
Yeah.
Hitting all of the fans.
The reason I say that because we all know it's never going to happen. But Kyle, thank you so much, man. It's been great catching up. I can't believe it's how long it's been since we've done this, and amazing work, super impressive,
guys.
And so much wisdom shared today. I can't thank you enough for agreeing to be here with us.
100%. Like Nectar said, so many lessons shared, and really happy that while you've been heads down, your openness to share so much of your learnings and kind of come out to the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm a fan. So, all right, guys, take care.
All right, take it easy.